So everything is working. Welcome everyone. With webinars and tools, it's always fingers crossed that everything works, but it seems that all speakers are working and the tool as well. So welcome. Webinar today about a topic that is super interesting because I think it causes a lot of confusion still in a lot of companies, a lot of discussion, and I think we can hopefully resolve a lot of those discussions today because it's all around culture and not only culture on itself, but also scaling your culture if your organization is scaling. So really looking forward to the conversation. Quick introduction from my side. My name is Charlotte. I am one of the founders of eCulture, which is an HR tech startup based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. What we basically do is we develop neuroscientific games that we let your candidates play and also your team to make sure that we can objectively and unbiasedly say if a candidate is a match with the job and with your team without too much interference of any gut feeling and biases that you might have, with the goal eventually that you hire people that make your organization grow, but also diversity of people. So that's who I am, and I will be hosting the webinar today. So hopefully I won't say too much and let you guys all do the talking. But let's maybe first do a quick introduction. So I don't know, Tom, if you would like to start.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, Charlotte. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Tom, and I work at Unleashed. I think the nicest way to explain Unleashed is really through our mission, which is very much to make amazing people practices and great cultures like part of the success criteria and how people really consider what great businesses look like in the future more and more, which fortunately is kind of starting to happen and become more of a common part of the success conversation. And we do that by kind of lending our expertise in people, culture, leadership, talent, both to fast growth startups and scale ups and also to VCs. So yeah, very glad to be here today.
Cool, thank you. Estella, do you want to go next?
Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks for having me here today. Hi, Tom. Hi, Prez. Hi, everyone else out there. I'm Estella. I have had the great fortune of spending the last few years working with scaling startups, so predominantly seed and Series A businesses, going in generally as a either head of talent or head of people and culture. I've had a mix of roles, some interim and some permanent, but I think I've been very lucky to have kind of a breadth of experience and having seen quite a lot of different businesses. So seeing sort of where the common pain points are around scaling and people, and having had the opportunity to sort of play around and kind of work out what works well in terms of embedding culture. So yeah, looking forward to learning actually from Tom and Prez and having some interesting discussion around these.
Cool, thank you. Well, Prez, last but not least.
Hey, I'm Prez. I'm here from Team Taylor in the UK. We are a fun, cool startup that specialise in ATS. We're an applicant tracking system. And I head up a team of sales here in London, one of the early employees as we've gone through our growth. And it's my first webinar, so hopefully you guys will be kind to me. But just to share like what we embody in terms of culture, what we're trying to practice and actually help other companies instill through our recruitment platform and help build in theirs as well. But yeah, here to learn, just like Estella said.
Cool, thanks, Prez, and great to have you all. A short thing that I forgot to mention in the beginning. At the right corner of your screen, there is a chat functionality, a question functionality. So if you have any questions for us during the webinar, feel free to pop them there. If we can answer them right away, we will do so. And if not, then we have some time at the end, of course, to do that. So don't hesitate to jump in if you have any interesting findings or questions for us. Cool, it's interesting because we have, well, I would say I represent a small startup that maybe needs to go still through those growth stages. We have Team Taylor here, who's I think in the middle of it, and we have two experts who see this on a daily basis. So that's going to be interesting. For today, I want to focus on a couple of different topics, just to give everyone who's listening a quick overview of what's being discussed. I want to not spend too much time, but some time on the concept of culture itself. And the reason why is that I still see with a lot of our customers that culture is some sort of a vague term. Is it about values? Is it behaviors? Is it the skill sets? Is it something we should put on the wall? Or is it something that should be there? So I think there's still a lot of unclarity about what culture really is for an organization. I would like to have talked also about changing your culture along the way. Needs to happen when you're scaling as a company, but I think that for a lot of companies it's a difficult topic. And something that I also would like to discuss is the whole concept of culture fit versus culture add. Is there a danger in sticking so heavily to your culture that you only try to find the same people over and over again, which eventually also hurts your company? So that is the overview of what I'd like to discuss. Tom, if you work at a startup, if you start from Unleashed at a startup, and one of the founders asks you, like, how would you describe culture? What should we do as a company? What is the answer then that you would give?
It's a great question. It's a great question, and I agree with you. Such an important question, because I think only when, as a leadership team, you really understand like the value and the importance of culture, do you really start kind of working out how to go about kind of creating and scaling it in the right way. And I'd often start answering that question by what it isn't, I think, just to kind of dispel some myths. And you know, what isn't it then? It's not the ping pong table, it's not the beers after work, it's not the social events you put on, albeit that those things can be great contributors to your culture and being a lovely place to work. But actually I kind of see it as the way we do things around here, right? I think it's the simplest way to put it. It is the common beliefs, behaviors, actions that we have as a group of people. And yeah, really trying to understand then that as you scale, it's your culture more than anything else that you can put in place. It's going to be able to make sure that people can behave and act in certain ways, even when leaders perhaps aren't in the room to help them navigate decisions and actions that they need to take.
I think we could say then that one of the positives about COVID is that we removed the entire typical startup, this is our culture, indeed we have beer pong, Friday drinks, those kinds of things. I think that a lot of startups experience that indeed, that it's way more about how we behave than what we do when the weekend starts. So that's, I completely agree. Prez, how would you describe the culture at Team Tailor at the moment? It's an interesting one for you guys also, because you are distributed over different countries. That adds another layer of difficulty, of course.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, so to give a bit of context, we were founded in Stockholm, and when we came over to London, we were very close-knit. There was only like 2 or 3, so it was very easy. We had very close interaction. But as we've grown to now, I think we're on 30, 40, it's about how we're going to carry over that core culture that we've had from our founders, from our leadership team, going on to this whole new venture in London. How would I describe it? It's interesting. I don't think I have enough words for that. It's very organic, it's wholesome, and I know that all sounds very cliche, but it's something that we're trying to build together with everyone in the team. It's a flat structure. Everyone has their own assets, and it's just a lot about listening and I guess moving forward with one goal, but with everyone's input, really. I hope that describes it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Estelle, do you think that a lot of young companies underestimate the importance of culture?
That's a good question, because I think culture is certainly in the tech scene and startup scene, it's a big word, and we see it a lot everywhere. And I think there's one thing being aware of it and saying the right things, and then there's a big gap between that and actually sitting down and thinking about what that means, what it means practically, what it means to actually deliver things around culture, because it's such an ethereal thing. And actually you have to take something that's quite hard to describe, as Press was saying there, it's kind of hard to get your arms around it. It's based on feelings and emotions, often culture, and then taking it, operationalizing it effectively, which is quite dry. And I think with obviously what's happened in the last 18 months or 2 years, COVID has, really made people have to think, because it's such a change, moving from, if you're office based, to being remote. How do you translate that culture? And it means that you have to start, like, kind of, I think codifying it is probably the best way of describing it. So articulating, writing down what your culture is and how you see that. So I think it's, from what I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, I think it's definitely something that earlier stage startups have become more aware of. And certainly in the last 18 months, it's been a really hot topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, something that I always find interesting, it relates a bit to Leo's question. Great to have you, by the way, Leo. Culture and 3 hashtags. I think that maybe my company is not the best example when it comes to culture. We have, I believe, a very strong culture, but it's not written down anywhere. So I think that if you would ask my team about the culture, that they would give a similar answer. But it's not that we, as a management team, consciously spend time on formulating a culture. And we were 30 people now, so maybe we're a bit on the late side of things. However, what I also hear a lot from our customers is that they're saying, like, hey, we were with 10 people. We are a tech startup. It's part of the deal that we have a culture. So we wrote down our culture. We have our values on the wall now. And it actually turned out that we were not in the position at that time to formulate a culture already. Now it turns out that it's actually not correct for the type of company that we are. Do you, Tom or Estella, see that happening in companies, that they maybe started forcing describing their culture too early, resulting in the fact that you need to change it later on?
Yeah, I think it's a question that you kind of raised the other day, Charlotte, and I've been thinking about it a little bit since, especially with your example of kind of equal share. And I think what people can do is they can lean too far one way in the designing of their culture and perhaps the codification. And when we say codification, what do we mean? We mean creating values, behaviors, rituals, other things that kind of, help people to understand exactly what it is that the culture expects of them. And obviously that will morph and change as you grow. But at a very early stage, you see founders potentially trying to design that culture entirely on their own. And that's great. But as you bring key people into the business, if you're too rigid with that, how are you allowing those people to contribute to what they're going to bring to that culture as you scale? And equally, sometimes you see people democratize the entire process, and actually it's not connected to the founder's beliefs of what that is. And so they might write that down on a piece of paper, as you're saying, actually feel committed to it because the team have committed to that and kind of shared their thoughts. But then actually 6 months later, the business needs to pivot, the behaviors need to change in some ways to get a strategic advantage. And if the founders aren't then believing in the values and the behaviors and the culture, and they need something different, it becomes very kind of inauthentic or kind of potentially contradictory. So yeah, I think I would always advocate for trying to find the right balance in how you start to write down what that is, to do it collaboratively, but make sure as leaders you are taking a bit of a lead on that too, and keeping things loose enough, knowing that reflect on that every year as you scale, for example, is always going to be a really healthy exercise to ensure continued kind of authenticity, but also like commitment to what it is that you're sharing with people when they join the team, for example.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, sure.
So I was just going to say, just to echo what Tom said, I think that there's some key words there. I think authenticity and balance kind of sounds a bit obvious, but when you're in the thick of things and on the inside of things, it's sort of take a step back. But authenticity is what drives culture and values, unless you're having to come in and do a kind of a sharp turn in terms of readdressing an issue, a cultural issue, and you're doing a culture change. I think, you really should be aiming for authenticity. Anything that's contrived is only going to come undone a few months down the way and possibly cause problems. And in terms of again, timing is everything. When is the right time to do things? At what point do you start to make things sort of more formalized in terms of codifying culture. It's hard to know. There's no kind of preset answer. There's no one right way, but having that, being authentic, and I think there's a certain amount of instinct from a leadership position that you have to go with.
Yeah.
So culture should be more, no, let me rephrase that question. There should be a balance between the team agreeing on the culture, but also the management team taking the lead and defining their culture. Because if it happens that the team takes the lead, then it could result in the fact that the management team is not 100% comfortable with it and it's going to change anyway. Is that what a fair summary?
Yeah, I think I personally think so. I think there's a really interesting HBR article that I'd be happy to kind of share in the link in a moment if I can find it, which kind of analyzes lots of different company values and kind of cultural artifacts over the years and segments them into different types of values you have when codifying your culture, and it kind of advocates for having some aspirational values, which may be values that aren't actually represented within your people and within your core behaviors today, but which, to create the strategic advantage that you need in the market, you have there as almost a call to action to create a certain type of behavior to be able to change your culture towards that as you grow. The mistake that some people can make is they want all of their values to be aspirational, and this is kind of their idyllic culture, but that's not in any way represented by the beliefs or the behaviors or the character traits of the people they currently have in the organization. And so it's totally nonsense and inauthentic and yeah, no better than that poster on the wall or on your careers page. So leadership has to lead with these things, but absolutely should engage the people of the organization in their contributions, their commitment, their alignment to that. But if you go too far that way and the leadership team isn't leading with that and there's a disconnect, then it's not going to be helpful for anybody in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Prez, for how long are you working at Team Taylor now?
So I just got a Slack message this morning saying happy anniversary in your 3rd year. So it's been 3 years today.
Can you still remember when you started at Team Taylor how they, well, educated is maybe the wrong word, but how you got introduced to the type of culture that they were having that time?
Yeah, no, definitely. I can tell you a little bit about my journey as well. I think it's, again, to use the word organic, where I met our head of sales who came out to UK to start the team, and me and him just clicked a lot, and it was more personality based. And then I went through this steps, and we were much smaller, so I would have our headquarters in Stockholm, so we'd have a lot of interaction with the main team over there. We'd go out there, they'd come over here, and we'd go to places in between. It was the question. Sorry, Charlotte. The question was, what was the culture like, or?
Yeah, and maybe also how you got introduced to that culture, because it's not something you can force on people, but there needs to be a way to make sure that new employees, of course, understand the culture and the vibe of the company.
No, definitely. I mean, it could start from, so till today, we still have a culture interview at the 3rd part of our interview process, which we value a lot, and it's more based on the candidate asking us how they feel and how they'll fit in with people from all parts of organizations to really get a feel. And I think it's important when having that culture fit coming into the office every day, working in that environment, and how you get introduced to it is from that stage early on of, are you going to be a right part of that culture, that team? And I can say that there's definitely a red thread throughout everyone in Team Taylor or within our company that I guess has that just one quality that they're striving towards. And it again, codify is a great word because it's very hard to define this particular thing or put my finger on it. But it happens over time how you get introduced to the craziness that is within our company. But it's nice. You come in every day and you're like, great, I actually belong here.
Cool. I hear you guys. I think you all three said it now. Like coding your culture, decoding your culture. That completely makes sense, but that also sounds like something that is super hard to do. Estella, you, for example, we know each other as you of course work at Boundless that we also work for. You enter the company there, it's a startup, so they are, I assume, in the middle of the process of defining a culture. How does that work, that process of codifying your culture, of attaching data points to your culture? Because that's extremely difficult, especially if it applies to values.
Yes, I mean, it does start. I mean, my experience is that, you know, there's an element of you need to have a good starting point. So, you know, your vision, mission, and values, and having those articulated is in some way, shape, or form is really important, because those are your anchor points, and that provides you with an alignment. A way that I like to approach codifying culture is having those base points, and then almost running a kind of like an audit type approach against all of the aspects that contribute towards or that make up an organization. So, for example, that might be how you communicate, literally like the tools that you use to communicate. Do you use Slack or email? How do you have meetings? How are decisions made? What rituals do you have? How do you reward people? What benefits do you give people? Sort of, how do you hire? All of these like touch points, all of these things in an organization, and basically sort of running, I say an audit, but looking at how you do things. Currently, are you happy with how they, you know, we all have in organizations, there are always things that you do well and that you're happy with, that feel right, and then there are other things that you're not doing very well or you want to change. And basically running those against your vision, mission, and values, and saying, well, do these things align to what we are doing, what we purport to be doing, how we present ourselves to the world, and how we would like to be? And then working from there, basically using that as your starting point, and then building out those changes, those processes, setting, say, policies. That sounds very heavy. It doesn't need to be as heavy as that, but sort of saying, this is the way that we have meetings, or this is the way that we communicate. That's how I, in a nutshell, that's how I kind of go about as a whistle-stop tour to sort of beginning to codify your culture.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So basically, if I summarize it briefly, then looking at collaboration, interaction, and rewarding, so kind of writing down all those interactions.
Yeah, I mean, those are a few off the top of my head. I mean, if you're in an office, it would include things like your office decor, you know, your layout. You know, it's all of the things that are the fabric of that underpin your organization, all of the kind of operational points. Yeah, sorry, I just gave you examples of things that were kind of...
No, but that really helps, because that makes it so much more tangible, because I'm always like, if I would have to sit down here with my co-founders and write down what we do, what our culture is as a company, then give me a white piece of paper, and it's so clear in my head how our culture is, I think, but it's super hard to put it on paper. So making it tangible with these things, like, indeed, how do we make decisions? What does a daily office look like? How do we communicate with each other? Like, I can imagine that these are super easy things to write down, which also can make it therefore easier to eventually link that together to culture. So that completely makes sense.
We've sort of been refining our process quite a lot at Unleashed, as we've done this with kind of various different clients of different stages. Some like seed stage, some sort of like Series C, D stage, who have already got values in place and kind of looking to kind of you know, maybe change something they've already got in place and sort of renovate that slightly for the future. And I think like it always starts by getting a cross section of your people, your key people that represent the organization into rooms and listening to them. Like, that has to be the key start to any of this, and actually asking them questions, essentially reflecting on like, what makes you great, the behaviors that we really do already encourage around here, maybe the behaviors we discourage, those that we maybe tolerate but should be discouraging, because that helps us to then kind of work towards the aspirational behavior change side of things, and lots of great questions to really help bottle that like secret sauce that you already have in the business. And then when you've got that information, you can really start to bring the leadership team and the founders specifically in a lot more detail and say, this is what the team is saying. Do you recognize that? If the team behave this way, will this help you to achieve your strategic goals? and actually starting to sort of like almost pull them apart a little bit and add that additional kind of strategic layer in. And all of that is essentially a data collection exercise. And then you do, if we're being really fancy, we call it affinity mapping. All it means is getting some themes from the kind of things that people have said and starting to theme the comments and answers that people have shared together into themes, which begin becoming your like codified culture, right? That's kind of the first step towards your values that you might eventually end up with. And then it's all about testing and iterating, as with loads of these things, sending it out to the team, getting them to add examples if they've seen these things happening, getting them to challenge them if they don't think these are healthy behaviors to encourage, and eventually getting to a point where you've got the right inputs. You've then looked at that very objectively, and then you've got sort of alignment and commitment to moving these things forward. And then like Estella's saying, like, great to do that, cool, but actually then what, kind of who cares? And it only is then going to come to life if you really bring that to life in every single touch point you can across the team. And that's really when values become lived and breathed, right? That's what you're really then looking to bring across. And Alex is sharing some very cool things in the chat. I can see culture mapping tool. That looks very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Alex.
Oh, very nice articles. Alex, I'm going to contact you for the follow-up webinar, I think. Hey, that brings me to a point that I don't want to touch upon for too long, because I also want to use the time to talk about changing culture, scaling culture. But something that I do need to ask, because it's a question that we as a company get on a daily basis. Then you have that culture written down, and you have those values, and you do, Press, you also mentioned it, you do cultural interviews as a company when you hire someone, which completely makes sense. And what happens then to the diversity of your team? What happens if it's hiring for culture fit and looking for someone who ticks all the boxes? Like we have a lot of companies that come to us like, these are the 3 values that I have. So I'm looking for creativity, curiosity, and we're in it together. These are the behaviors linked to that. So everyone that I'm going to hire for my team should have those behaviors. The consequence of that, for a lot of companies, of course, that diversity is decreasing in the company. So how to find that balance between not hiring the same people over and over again, but they also do need to fit your culture somehow?
I think it's a really important question. I think I'm going to sound like such a hypocrite, but I think culture is something like Tom and Stella said, where we should have core values and it helps us define it and look for it. But we need to, I guess we're all aware that culture is something that changes, and I'm sure you get to that point later, Charlotte, but as the company grows or as the company changes in direction and we welcome it, it's the only way things organically grow. But culture is something that should be ever changing, not really static. And I think it's go 50-50, go in looking for those qualities that we mentioned, but also having an open mind and understanding different values, and like diversity will help us grow and enrich us. And just it's vital for a leadership team, the founders, or everyone in that environment to have an open mind going forward and going, you know what, this would be a great addition to our team, and we don't actually have this right now, and let's bring that on and take it upon our culture as well. Yeah, I think so. Just open-mindedness, really.
Absolutely.
I always like to think with a statement, it's like culture, not cult. You know what I mean? When you're hiring. Yeah. So like, you know, culture is like you said, it's organic. And with every person you hire, your culture changes microscopically, incrementally, like full stop. So when you're hiring, I'm people talk about hiring for culture fit. I kind of feel like it should be hiring more really for values fit, because your values and behavior are like the deepest, like in terms of like people, that's the base note. And the culture is almost like a level above that in kind of strata terms. You know what I'm saying? So you can hire people for values and they'll fit, but it gives you that fluidity around culture. Whereas if you're hiring for culture fit, then you do tend to, I think, you close down more on the diversity aspect, and you do end up going more culty. I mean, but it's horses for courses. Some businesses that suits, and that's what works for some environments and certain types of business setup, and others absolutely need to be very open-minded and like are aiming to be super diverse.
I think there's some really interesting comments that people have been sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, we are starting a discussion here.
Yeah, it's great, and so I think the terminology and the wording is so important, and I think that you know, naturally, kind of people especially do sort of shiver a little bit when the term culture fit comes out, because I think we've all either worked somewhere or have kind of been in an environment where checking for culture fit is not even done in this nice way like you're sharing, Prez, where you've got this interview and it's objective and you're looking actually for quite specific things, not thinking about who the person is in terms of their characteristics, but actually what they bring, and you are looking for that. But actually, so many startups you work in, certainly from personal experience, where the culture fit is getting the most popular member of the office to go and have a chat to someone and see if they'd like to have a beer with them, right? Which of course has terrible consequences, both for building a team that has diversity of thought and doesn't kind of step into groupthink, but also for like inclusion and diversity and like representation purposes. And I think my perspective is culture add, great. Culture contribution, I saw amazing. Values alignment, I totally agree. The important thing is that you have ways to check your biases. You have ways to look for things that can belong to anyone and can be a brilliant addition to your company rather than belong to a certain group of people, and be really honest with yourselves about if the process you set up allows that to happen. I
couldn't agree more. I think yeah, it's a tricky discussion, and it still happens indeed too often that we just want to tick a couple of boxes and then you are fit for the company. So I really like the approach you guys are having. Hey, something that I would like to discuss, because I assume that a lot of people in this webinar will work at, well, I saw some of the names, so I think it's a lot of scale-ups also here in the webinar that have gone through a couple of those growth stages probably already. Tom, you wrote a super nice blog post. If for the people, I'm going to post it in the comments in a second on our website about when do you think it's time to give your culture a fresh start, or do you think that your culture might need a fresh start someday? I read the article and it completely made sense to me, but that is a tricky topic. Changing your culture in your organization, that goes along with, I think, a lot of discussion and a lot of friction. But maybe let's start with the first question first then. If I would have my culture on paper now and I'm part of a management team, when is the moment that I will recognize that maybe my culture is not working for me that well anymore?
Perhaps I can just share a super, hopefully tangible example here that answers the question, but I've kind of seen in practice. So back when I was head of people for HelloFresh UK, actually we had a new managing director come in, and she looked at what we called our HelloFresh DNA and the behaviors of the organization and the strategic needs of the organization, and connected those things together, and really saw a lack of, with the fresh kind of pair of eyes, of customer-centric behavior, as she kind of called it. She's like, for whatever reason, this is a super navel-gazing team, really data-driven, really good at prioritizing all these other things we had in our sort of DNA, but they're not thinking about the customer enough. And look, she could have simply added customer centricity onto our DNA thing and announced that in an all-hands meeting, and that would have done absolutely diddly squat. But instead, she really brought it to life in several different ways across the organization. So she opened a new customer insights team and gave funding to them. She created a customer squad to be a cross-functional representation of the business to highlight customer issues. We created a recognition award for people that have kind of been seeing sort of customer issues and bringing them to life, and had a customer party where we invited them in each year to hear from them. And I think for me, that tells the whole story so nicely, which is like, does it exist now? No. How can I tell we're not doing the right things to treat with the market, and we're seeing the strategic gap between where we need to be and where we are? And it's our people's behaviors that need to change. How do I go about changing this? Everywhere. And it's about embedding it across so many touch points and really driving that behavior change in the sort of operational rhythm that the company has.
Hey, and the example you're giving now for well, HelloFresh specifically, I think most of us know them. The customer-centric aspect is huge, of course, for such a B2C company. Is it fair to say that assessing the extent to which your culture really suits your company is by assessing to what extent it still aligns with your mission as a company?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess you should be able to notice like behavior gaps when looking at performance. And I use the word performance quite widely, right? Because you could look at that as in like cultural performance and how your people are feeling. So like your engagement survey or your attrition data could be a great indicator of not performing well by your people. Equally, not having achieved the share of total addressable market that you want within your new market you've moved into could be another indicator of that. And like whenever you're missing a strategic goal you want to achieve and you're analyzing the gap, the behaviors of your people should absolutely be one of those things that you look at. And in that instance, that was where that customer centricity came from. But for any other company, I think that could be something super similar, like the classic examples of loads of company that didn't digitalize anywhere near kind of quickly enough. And so the incumbents in the market were totally taken out by the newcomers. And a really strategic focused CEO at that time would have seen that the behavior change was needed within the organization to reach the strategic goals that they needed, and it was too late by the time that the market shifted in that way during the sort of digital revolution. But yeah, it should just be a first thing that you're looking at when trying to understand why gaps are occurring between what you want to achieve and what you're currently achieving.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Hey, Prez, you're working at Team Taylor for 3 years now, and Team Taylor has gone through an amazing growth over the last couple of years. I think also in terms of people. Did the culture change over the last 3 years?
Interestingly, not as much as you think. I mean, I think, again, in regards to our hiring and who we're looking for, the whole conversation we had at the first half, we tend to, the culture has been, it's been, God, I would know how to define the particular type of cultures. In certain aspects, the social environment, the personality types, it hasn't changed too much. But in terms of as a business and where we're going and our output and delivery methods, they've changed a lot. It's quite blatant, but as a company gets bigger, people lose that startup mindset. It becomes more bureaucratic or anything like that. And in that sense, yes, it's a given. It has, but I'd like to think that we're still the same as they were like 4 people or 5 people. Culture hasn't changed too much, I don't think.
And it's interesting because when I, again, not the best example, I need to do a lot when it comes to codifying culture. But when I think about culture, I would describe it as the way we do things and why we do things as a company. And the why is obviously the vision and the mission that we have as a company, and the way we do it is the way we want to interact with each other and how we want to collaborate in order to reach that goal. And then how we are doing it needs to change when your company grows. It is different to collaborate with a team of 2 people or a team of 30 people. So would you say that part has changed in Team Taylor?
Yes, but for the good, bringing on different mindsets and understanding. I think there's a lot of ownership, not only on leadership, but with everyone across the company of why we're doing this, and having that unity going forward. I don't think it has changed, and I think it's key for every person that we bring on, every person that we hire has that shared mindset, and it's important that we hold on to that throughout as we grow, to have that not change as much as possible. That's who we are, right? And it goes back to that same point of we will change in a good way and change who we are, with what I just said. But I don't think, and maybe that's a very hard stance that I'm taking there, but I don't think it should change a lot. I'd be keen to hear what you guys say.
I think, sorry, I was going to, something I've sort of experienced is that people don't, I mean, people, it's a well-known fact, people are often resistant to change, like full stop, unless what's communicated with them is like the what's in it for them, right? So there's often an inflection point when a small company goes from being sort of like, we see this quite a lot, a family, that kind of small, close-knit, very cozy feel. And then that next step where it becomes more of a, you know, it's a team and it feels more like a bit more of a grown-up like business. And it's that I've experienced that kind of transition can be quite tricky, because I think that's where people who are right in at the beginning feel the biggest change. And I think it's a question of just communicating. If you communicate with people well, and when you're making changes, you give people good advance notice, you talk through things and you involve them, and they realize and they can see what the positives are and the benefits are, then you can kind of get through that and you bring everyone on board. It's just generally, I think, if you make sudden changes and you don't communicate, and people kind of get fear because they think that somehow it's going to have a negative impact, or it's something that is going to remove something good from, you know, something they enjoy doing, or way that they enjoyed doing something before, then that's where you kind of get the fear and you get the resistance. Whereas if you can just sort of show the plus points, you can get through all of that. So I don't know if I went a bit off piste with that, but I just wanted to kind of articulate that, because that is something that is, I think, quite common, and it's something that people are aware of, and it happens every time. There are these phases. It's a bit like, I liken it a bit to like a child, children growing up, you know, they go through different phases. They go from being a baby to a toddler to like a young child and an adolescent. And each phase, you know, there is a clear change in terms of independence and the different kind of frameworks that are needed.
I think it's an interesting one, Stella, because something that I always say, which is not something that everyone would agree with necessarily, I think, is that I think you should accept that not every employee is made for every stage of your company. I think it's a natural consequence of scaling that there are different challenges and different people that like those kinds of challenges. But do you think that sometimes that founders stick too much to the family kind of culture because they also fear those first employees to leave if they change it too much?
It's a good question. Good
question.
I know.
It's a great question.
There's a great article again I'm thinking of that I share, which is this concept of like giving away your Legos, and the specific concept is around engineering teams in particular. So if you've got an early stage tech team who tend to be like the creators of this amazing product and really kind of owning and understanding like all of the code and everything like that, and you're going to be scaling quickly, and those people haven't built that in a way where they can very quickly give it to someone else, and B, aren't psychologically in the right frame of mind to be able to very quickly give that to someone else without worrying about it, then you're setting yourself up for trouble further down the road, right? And this isn't just true for tech teams or for engineering or building things. This is true for your question, I think, Charlotte, about kind of the early stage team. The contracting you do at an early stage with your employees and continue to do as you grow, and helping them to understand and see how their role will evolve and how their behaviors might need to change and how the culture will naturally adapt as the business grows are crucial if you want to avoid those early stage employees suddenly leaving. And I agree with you. There will also be a time for those people to sort of graduate from the business onto something else. Some might also adapt and want to stay, and that's a healthy part of evolution and life. But creating that kind of psychological sort of safety within the team, but also kind of expectation setting about how they can handle those things. And there will be challenges down the road, but we know they're coming, so we can talk about them openly together is a great step to being able to then make those positive moments rather than negative moments a year or maybe even 5 years down the line.
I think
absolutely.
To give insight into, I guess, the company, Team Taylor and stuff, I think there shouldn't be too much importance. I mean, I think they're vital, those early stage family members and those older employees within that family culture. But I think it's about passing on from one person to another down the organization, so every single person in that organization feels like those early stage members, and they have the exact same authenticity that those early stage members have. And I think it's very doable. I've seen it in Team Taylor where whether you have employee number 1 that brings on employee number 10 with that exact same love for that company, that culture, the product, everything that you want to do, employee number 10 will then give that to, if you will, in these arbitrary numbers of employee number 20, employee number 40. And it's about, and that's what culture is, essentially finding those people that share those same ideologies. And now you suddenly have a large company with everyone with the exact same enthusiasm as those early family members that, I mean, not that we don't care about them, but it doesn't matter if they go, because, you know, we have everyone the exact same.
Yeah, and I think that's super cool what you're saying, because what I and then I want to move on to a question that was asked by Federico, because I think it's an interesting one. But what I experience here is that the eQualture's vision and mission is to shape the world of unbiased hiring. So we've started a company with the aim that companies remove bias from the hiring process and that we create equal opportunities for everyone. So obviously, everyone that starts working at our company feels aligned with what we do and feels that it's important, either because of a personal experience or because it happened to a friend or a family member that they weren't treated equally once. So what I think is really cool to see here is that sometimes if I'm on the terrace now with new employees, then normally it was always me telling the founding story of the company. And now I see that my head of marketing all of a sudden is telling that story. And I'm sitting there like, yeah, you actually told it better than I would have told it. And I think that's what you mean, right? That you find people that are so aligned with what you do that they can even more enthusiastically tell the story than maybe you would have been able to do so. And I think that's super cool. I think that's maybe a sign that your culture is working out. Hey, a question from Federico, because I think it's a really valid one. As everyone feels sort of, I think every company feels they need to do something about culture, and most of them have values, but if everyone acts on it, I don't know. Federico was asking, how would you recommend working on culture to be a daily thing on the agenda? And as an example, you mentioned we sit down 6 months ago with a nice PowerPoint presentation. Everyone is super enthusiastic. We go back to the rush of today, and then everyone forgets about it. I think that's something that a lot of companies would recognize themselves in, to be fair.
I think the first thing that springs to mind is, again, that sort of question on like, what do we mean by culture? Because my initial thought there, Federico, is if it's something that's only in a PowerPoint every 6 months, then it's not culture. Because if culture is the way that we do things around here, potentially the culture is rushing and everybody working on their agenda in silos and not talking about how we behave. And actually that's the current culture in the organization. So that's the bit to look at, right? Not the 6 monthly cycle, but actually what realistically is our culture right now? What are our ways of working? What are the ways that we behave, and how can we start to kind of make some gentle commitments that are a bit more aspirational to each other, and start to put these into the operational rhythm so that they're part of what you do weekly. I'm trying to think of a good example. One of the clients that we've worked with over the last year or so, they've got a basically like positive conflict, and like creating positive conflict is one of their like commitments to their ways of working, and they really believe in kind of openly and safely challenging each other. And there are obviously some challenges around that, but tons of positives if you get it right. And I had a conversation with their founder who was like, we tell people to do this, we do it ourselves, but no one else is doing it. Why not? How can we make this another thing? And they use Miro a lot because they're a remote team. And so we came up with the idea together of introducing on all of their Miro boards a challenge box, so that at any point, if people aren't so confident yet to verbally challenge people, they can chuck a sticky note in there, which is like, this is my challenge, this is the other perspective we should be looking at, this is the lens we should be looking at. And that's now become a part of every single virtual meeting that they have. So I think that's a nice example of a really small thing you can do to get a behavior you want in your people starting to come through in the fabric of what you do. It's in all of your meeting agendas, it's in all of your Miro boards, and that will start that movement towards that becoming a more natural kind of native behavior for people to follow.
Really cool. Very cool. Hey, we have 10 minutes left. I think that most of the questions were already answered in between. I've, of course, asked a lot of questions from the perspective what I think is important when it comes to having a chat about culture. But I can imagine that there are some things that haven't been said that you would still like to mention about it. So I'm going to ask all three of you. If it's the answer is we've discussed everything, and that's also fine, of course. Like, is there something you would like to highlight now still about this topic that I didn't ask you during this webinar about? Now I'm really putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think for me, it's maybe just it's too much of a topic to go into depth in now, but I imagine lots of people, lots of us collectively are in a moment now where perhaps we've made a decision on what the future of work looks like from like a more like physical perspective, i.e. we'd love everyone to come in a couple of days a week, but can be flexible, or we're going totally remote, or maybe we're betting on the office, which we're seeing more and more clients do, to be honest. And they've made that decision a few months ago, and now they're going, shit, we haven't really worked out how this works from a cultural perspective, have we? Okay, it's a bit different. It's different than being fully remote. It's definitely different from being in the office. How do we figure that out? And so for almost every company out there now is a great moment to be collaboratively working on agreeing how your culture of the future works and being really intentional about that. And it connects very briefly as well to a question that I know Thomas Mitkus asked earlier about sort of reinvigorating the culture when it goes off track, which could be for kind of various reasons. Bring people into the conversation, listen to people, have conversations, make sure that there's a process, make sure there's objectivity, and just make sure you're talking about it rather than just expecting it to change on its own. Culture can be controlled, but to start with, you have to start the conversation and start by listening to one another to take that first step.
Cool. So you raised the bar now, Tom.
Well, I think
who's next?
I was going to say, just to your point there, Tom, like it might, even in small companies, I think it might feel quite difficult sometimes to open up that conversation or get that feedback like in person. So there are, I mean, you can even start just by using, there are tools out there, like really simple ones that integrate with Slack or like that run pulse surveys. And even if you just start with something gentle like that, where people can answer questions almost anonymously, because sometimes I've found in teams, you know, some people that you're always going to get some people that are really gregarious and outgoing and speak up. I'm not one of those. And then you're going to get some people that really are completely the opposite but have a lot to say and would contribute, but, you know, wouldn't do that openly in a conversation, but would be happy to do that online. So I think, you know, to Tom's point, having something that goes out on a regular basis so people feel like they've got a platform, and that this becomes a kind of front of mind, but it in the background at the same time. So it's not an onerous activity, but it's, you know, it is front of mind is a good place to start.
Yeah,
I think it sounds like I'm jumping in the bandwagon here, but it should be that I think every single person, people watching, we're here to having this discussion. It should be open. People need to understand that they need to keep challenging themselves and understand that culture is something that, yes, we define and from top above leadership given out there, but also have trust that now the people that you brought into your company also have that same mindset that they can as I said before, evolve it, or have that platform, like I said, whether it's, we all have, I mean, things like Winning Tech or just surveys going around constantly giving feedback, but just an environment where people feel safe and open to constantly let everyone else know in their company where they are, how they feel, and understand that culture isn't just one thing and it will always change, and it's just which direction you want to take it in, really. But yeah,
absolutely, completely agree. And I think that's also the main responsibility, of course, of I think the management team sets the level of comfort I think that people have in talking about it. Like, I hear my co-founder saying quite often, like, hey, some things we just don't know and we're still figuring it out. And I think it's okay to sometimes show that you don't know things yet, because it also creates sort of, I think if a management team shows vulnerability, then people can also show that themselves. So I think it's a fair point you're making, Chris. Estella, something you wanted to add to the conversation, or?
Gosh, I'm worried if I start, that will open I mean, it's such a big topic, isn't it? It'll open a whole new can of worms. No, I just think, I think we've covered a fair spread. I think, the key points are, it's about being aware. And I really like, Prez, what I think probably quite a good place to almost end on, but the point that he's made about from a leadership perspective, about making sure that people feel that they're in a safe environment. That should really be a given. I think these days it's like almost your duty of care as a leader to be like that. And if you're asking people to come and join your organization, that should be the starting point. I think it's quite obviously that we're talking about leaders there, and if you're coming in as a professional, whether you're an HR, a talent, or a culture person, it's tricky because you can't dictate that. But I think what you can do is be aware of behaviors in leaders, and there's an element, I think, around, this is a slight tangent by the way, but around coaching, where if you see that you kind of see behaviors that maybe aren't ideal in leadership teams, kind of working into a conversation perhaps that coaching is a good idea, is probably, I think that's something that I've seen in the past has worked really well in situations where there's culture is perhaps at a point where it needs to change a bit. So I'm an advocate of coaching, and that's probably something that's worth thinking about.
I agree.
I love it. It's not fixed, right? Like, I think when we do these like values alignment interviews or whatever, we're often going, is this person exactly this? Are they wired in this way that we want them to be wired? And actually, the best businesses that I've seen, they don't only attract and recruit based on their values, but they also set up like their learning and development kind of approach based on their values. And even something like the growth mindset has been proven to be able to be built into people through training and support and coaching. So yeah, have some faith in backing those people that aren't quite there in terms of behaviors yet, which I love. That's a great thing to introduce, Estella. Absolutely. And I think it's it couldn't have been a better last takeaway, because we reached the end of the webinar. I've learned a lot about it myself. I got a lot of valuable tips for my own company, so I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much, guys, for all wanting to join today and contributing to the discussion. If all the people who are listening still have some questions for one of us, we are all on LinkedIn. You can all find us, and I assume that we all are more than happy to continue the discussion online. So for now, I really would like to thank you for joining the webinar. We will make sure to send the recording to you afterwards. If you would like to listen to it once again, you can do so. And for now, thanks so much again, everyone. And I wish you a very pleasant weekend. Amazing. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks,
guys.
Thank you.
Bye for now.